We now will return to the life of Joseph. Jesus studies is actually more important, but we can't do Easter all the time. And we'll go back to the life of Joseph and eventually read Genesis 41. When we think of Joseph, we think of the correctly God directed his steps in life. And that's true of him and true of us. Jeremiah 10:27 teaches that it's not within us, but the Lord directs our steps. God directs our steps, but I'd like to phrase it differently. For Joseph, God directs our stops. I mean, he had things that weren't working. There wasn't much going on. There's like, his brothers throw him in a pit, and he's in a prison, and nothing much is going on. It's uncertain how God will use him. It was unfair the way he was treated. So it makes sense that we talk a lot about God directing our steps, going forward, and accomplishments and success, and it makes perfect sense. But there are in the Bible lots of stops. And all of us will go through a period of stops. Abraham said he was going to have a son and waited 25 years. The Jacob story, he was over there with Laban for 20 years while working with the livestock. Joseph was in slavery and in prison for 13 years. There's lots of times in the Bible where there's a stop. We don't even know what happened to him, but in Galatians, the Apostle Paul said that after he saw Jesus on the Damascus Road and became a Christian, he spent 3 years in Arabia. He's out in the desert. What was he doing? We don't know. God was telling him to stop and growing him in a different way for 3 years. So Genesis 41 is going to be the pivot from prison to palace. Prison to palace. He's gonna go up, but he's been kind of slowed down for a long time. So it begins, Joseph will change shortly, but it begins in Genesis 41 with Pharaoh having these dreams. Let's read verses 1 through 7. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years. And Joseph's in there, prison, stopped, nothing's happening. After 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile, and lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, scrawny cows. They stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile, and the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. Behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. A little bit more on Joseph before he gets out of prison. 13 years. 13 years of a stop. Proverbs had not been written yet, but Joseph lived it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So, lean not to your own understanding. I mean, no doubt it didn't make any sense. He had this dream, remember, back in the Promised Land, he had this dream that he would be exalted and his brothers would come and bow down to him. And he had a dream of great things happening, and in 13 years, nothing much happened. God will use me greatly, he thought, but in those 13 years, just a confused mess. That's why I picked Amazing Grace. And Ken actually picked out the line without us talking about it. Through many dangers and toils and snares I have already come. life of Joseph. He got through it, but there was a lot of stops in his life. He was the same theologically and ethically before and after. And personality-wise, he was the same in prison as he will be in the palace. So he didn't change his personality, but much more clear how God was going to fulfill his dreams, much more clear how God was going to use him. But in the 13 years in there, boy, lean not to your own understanding. There are times of waiting. It's Psalm 27:14 and Isaiah 40, wait on the Lord and he'll renew your strength. You'll mount up and fly around like eagles. But sometimes it's waiting. I think waiting it's very aggravating. What are you doing, God? What's going on? How are you going to use me? It's very, very aggravating. Well, there are lots of Bible characters where there was waiting. And then God used them greatly. And Joseph is one of them. So his dream was right, and the person was right, but the timing was not yet. That can happen. The goal is right. Wanting to do something is right. The plans are right, but not yet. Now, shortly when we read, God will exalt him. But while he's in prison, he can't tell what's going to happen with his future. He's just a mess. Well, what happened in that time of stop? I would say greater loyalty to God. God was testing him. Are you going to be loyal to me when nothing much is happening? Are you going to be loyal to me when it's confusing? Are you going to be loyal? And in Joseph's case, he was. And I think that it built him up so that when he was actually the most powerful person in the most powerful nation in the world, he was ready for it. Because his attitude would be that while he did have abilities, God must be the one doing this. Because it'd be very, very easy to get that much power and get corrupted. No problem with Joseph. And I think probably the time of uncertainty, the time of trouble, the time of what I have called a stop made him stronger when he really became the leader. We know the phrase from American history, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's true. It is true. And God put Joseph through a stop, pause. Can't figure out how God's going to use him. Nothing much happening. And then when he did get all that power, he realized that God had a lot to do with it. It wasn't all him. It wasn't all his IQ, and it wasn't all his righteousness, even though he had a high IQ and he was very righteous. And our efforts do matter, but it was more than that. And I think the stop and the uncertainty showed him that when he finally did rise, God had a lot to do with it. And he wasn't quite so tempted to be arrogant. Well, now, Pharaoh was very spooked by this dream, and so let's go on to verse 8. Now it came about in the morning that his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. These people are the confused ones. All that time, Joseph had the correct God. He had the correct theology, and he had the correct ethics. And he may not have known how God was going to use his life, but he knew what was true and what was error. And he knew what was right and what was wrong. So he might be confused about how his life is going to turn out, but he was not confused about what is right. They're the confused ones. Pharaoh's staff. We would call them sorcerers. They get brought in. Here's the dream. What does it mean? And they had no idea. Paul in Romans 1:22, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. 1 Corinthians 1:20, the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. Well, get away. Dare I say, the Greek word there for fool is moron. That one made it into English, but that's what it means. Nothing new about the so-called New Age. What's new about it? Maybe new that it crept into the United States. New in that sense. Nothing new about it. On and on and on, further back, years and years back, same thing. Bring the sorcerers into court. They can be advisors to the Pharaoh. In other Bible stories, we have in the book of Daniel the same thing. Let's see, 1,500 years later, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon will have sorcerers in the court. And he'll have a dream. Now, the story is a little bit different with Nebuchadnezzar. He wouldn't tell them what the dream was. They were supposed to guess that, and that made it even worse. They had no idea. And Nebuchadnezzar was more mad than Pharaoh. He threatened to execute him till Daniel could come up with a dream. But it does show that there were sorcerers in the court in Egypt and sorcerers in the court in Babylon. I could research some American stories, not as bad, but every once in a while, though, a leader will call. At any rate, they didn't know anything. And I think an illustration for now is there's all kinds of people that will say how wise they are, and they're like this. And God puts them in that category, and if people think about it sensibly, they are in that category. They don't have any answers. They don't know what they're doing. Well, when the sorcerers didn't have any answers, the cupbearer must have been listening, and so we go back to the cupbearer, and now he does something about it, verses 9 through 13. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses, which is like I'm going to bring up that I made the Pharaoh mad, I think, in the past. Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream. It came about just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Well, I didn't read the last verse of the previous chapter, chapter 40, but the last verse of chapter 40, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Well, intellectually he remembered it. In his brain he remembered Joseph, and that Joseph interpreted the dream, and he got out of prison, and he went back to work for the Pharaoh. Intellectually he remembered it, but he did not remember the discussion or remember what Joseph wanted, and maybe had replied and made a promise to Joseph, and he didn't remember to do what he was supposed to do. Maybe he was afraid to bring up that the Pharaoh was really mad at him in the past. Best not to bring that up and just let it go. But he's here listening, and now Pharaoh's mad at the sorcerers and not mad at the cupbearer. And now the topic is dreams, so he thinks it's safe to bring this up. Now, when we did this actual study, I'll make the same application. It's good to remember people that have done good things for us in the past. And maybe as we get older, some of them are gone, and we can remember them in our head. If they're still alive, good to remember them and good to tell them once in a while. Good thing. I do not want to say who, but in my case, since I made that application, I have texted once and tried to call twice someone who was very important in my past. That, anyway, I don't want to say who they are because you're all important to me, but they don't live in Amarillo anymore, and that's a good thing to do if you think. This is a little bit different, but ICR comes to mind. They have written some great books lately, and I kind of have in my mind I need to write them a thank you note to the authors of these books, which I don't think happens too often. But let's try to remember people that did important things for us and let them know that they had great influence in the past. So now the cupbearer remembers, and next Joseph gets out of prison. Let's read verse 14 through 16. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes. He came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Well, verse 16 is the most important, but let's talk a little bit about shaving first, because I know we all want to hear about shaving. It is historically true that the Egyptians shaved. What had happened was there had been conquerors in the recent past who all had beards. And as soon as the Egyptians got free of them, no one was going to wear a beard anymore because it reminded them of these past conquerors. I say that mainly because the customs of the Bible are correct customs. They're correct historical customs. There are quite a few of them. Relative to people of the Old Testament, the actual names start with David. And then there's a lot of them from David on, about, let's call it 1000 BC on. There's lots of Old Testament names. No less than 16 kings of Israel on Judah. In 2018, they found some more bullae. These are like little wax seals. They roll up a scroll and they put a wax seal on it with a ring. In 2016, they found Isaiah the prophet. And then the wonder was, is that the Bible Isaiah? Well, then they found King Hezekiah's seal about 10 feet away underground in Jerusalem. So, good number of people, in the New Testament much more, can't go into that, but customs. And shaving was a custom. The Egyptians would not look like their previous conquerors. So that's true. There's a lot of them in the book of Genesis. So he got out and put on new clothes. Verse 16 is more important for an application. And it was also in the past when he gave the dream to the baker and the cupbearer, he said that God is the one who can do this. And that was in prison. Now he's in the palace. And verse 16, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So here's a case of giving God the credit. In his particular case, it's bringing God up to powerful people. So they're both in here. Giving God the credit, bringing God up to powerful people. Books have been written in the past by White House staff that were not saved at the time, but later got saved. And this book I have in mind, the person was there a lot of times in the White House. And after they got saved, they said, well, these Christians would come in and say nothing. You know, church organizations and pastors, and they'd come in, and once they got in the president's office, they would say nothing. It might offend them, so they would say nothing. Well, here's a situation of bringing God up to powerful people. Now, we likely don't know that many powerful people, but bringing God up in a secular setting. bringing God up in a situation where attention to God should be given, and then we have a choice of bringing God up or clamming up. And Joseph was both. He brought God up in a powerful situation, and he didn't clam up. And the cupbearer had said to the Pharaoh, he's Hebrew, so when he brings up God, it's the Hebrew God that everybody has in mind, and he brought it right up, and he was not the least bit afraid to do so. And we should not be the least bit afraid to do so. To save time, I planned on not reading verses 17 through 24. It's a repetition where Pharaoh tells them the dreams. So we've already read the dreams, and here's a repetition. A couple of more things the Pharaoh added. He had never seen such scrawny cows. And when the thin ones ate up the fat ones, they were still thin. So retelling adds that information. Now, Joseph responds at verse 25. Now, Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years. The 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God is about to show Pharaoh what he is to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in the land of Egypt. And after them 7 years of famine will come. And all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the very subsequent famine. It will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Okay, 7 abundant years, 7 years of famine. There are ancient records of that long of a famine in Egypt. We don't know which one would be this one, but there are ancient records of 7 years of drought, and not much is growing. It did not and does not rain in Egypt very much anyway. The rain is further south in Africa, Lake Victoria, Uganda, Nile River start. It rains down in the jungle, and then it flows north and floods the Nile. If it floods the Nile, the delta of the Nile can grow things. If it doesn't rain down in Africa, nothing much comes, and they can have, it's basically a big sandbox in Egypt. And one obvious lesson here is that God may not cause all the weather, but he allows it or causes it. It's one or the other. God causes or allows crops. Now, I could stop there and apply, but he also causes or allows leaders, and those two are related. So we can look at verses 33 through 44, where they're going to pick Joseph for a leader. Verse 33. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land in Egypt in 7 years' abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for the food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority. And let them guard it. Let the food be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Where can we find a man like this, in whom is the divine spirit?" Or the Spirit of God, depending on the translation, whether you translate it pagan or translate it Hebrew. In whom is the Spirit of God, or whom is the Spirit of the gods. Verse 39, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house." And then they go on, linen clothes, gold necklace, chariot, bow the knee, and so forth. The 7 years of famine are not presented as a judgment. It's more like life goes up and down. Life goes good and bad. There's nothing special here as God is going to punish Egypt in a special way. It just goes up and down. And God causes his rain to fall on the just and the unjust, said Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. And then God allows good times and good years, bad times. Well, Joseph's attitude was, when we have years of abundance, let us save for the lean years. In the Bible, it's balanced. Don't oversave, hoard. Like Jesus talked about the person that had great abundance and didn't know what to do with it, so they just said, build bigger granaries. And then God says, you're a fool, and all of it came from God. So oversaving is not scriptural, but saving some is, and this is one of the good illustrations of it. Proverbs 6 through 8, look to the ant that's gathering food for the winter. In Proverbs 21:20, there is precious treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but the foolish person swallows it all up. So it's okay. Save some in the good years for what might come in the bad years. Don't save everything. Here, God is in control of that sort of thing. God is in control of the crops. Southern Michigan. Southern Michigan land is like Indiana, the bottom two counties. 17 miles away, DeKalb Corn tried to see how much they could grow. 295 bushels an acre. So, the United States is very good agricultural land. We wouldn't want to trade it with anybody. We're very, very good at it. God has blessed the United States. God controls that. He also controls who's in charge. Joseph, you're going to be, shall we call it, prime minister of the world's most powerful nation. You've been tested long enough and been loyal to God. You now know that you don't need to be arrogant. It's partly Joseph's hard work and partly his intelligence, but God's the one that let him have that position. And Joseph will have been humbled enough that he will trust in God all the way through. God superintended the crops. God superintended Joseph's life. God superintends Egypt. God superintends the United States. God superintends us. Now, we won't read the next section entirely, but verse 46. How old was Joseph when he's prime minister? 30. He sold him into slavery at 17. He's 30. That's why I said 13 years in prison. He's 30. And may I repeat the application? There are people in the Bible that they were godly from the time they were kids all the way through. There weren't any wasted years. And they're mature at a young age. Joseph was mature enough to be the, I'll call him prime minister, secretary of agriculture of Egypt, mature enough at age 30. There is no need to have wasted years. There are a lot of people in the Bible that were very, very mature at a young age. Ecclesiastes 12, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And I think of Mary at the Christmas time, mother of Jesus. She must have been really, really young. And Daniel was really, really young. Josiah was really, really young. Joseph was really, really young. Another application here is that when God is working, that doesn't mean we're on vacation. God was blessing, God was blessing, Joseph was working, Joseph was working, God was blessing, Joseph was working. The same is true with us when we are fulfilling goals, when we are, God is giving us blessing. That doesn't mean we are lazy. I have all these verses on work ethic, and we can talk about that some other time, but I'll just throw it down here. Whatever your hand finds to do, do with your might. And I will say something about Joseph that relates to modern times. When a hardship is coming, do something about it. To mess it all up, don't just do something, stand there to reverse it. But, boy, I think the United States is in real trouble. It's not a famine of food, but it's a famine of the Word of God. Like the book of Amos, it's a famine of the Word of God. It's in real trouble. And we are called to do something about it. And some are hardened, some are reprobate, some won't listen, others do. And more people than we might think do. There are people who are too far gone. They're hardened like the Pharaoh in the Exodus, and they're too far gone. There are people like that, but there are a lot of others that are not like that. And very often they don't get on the news. They don't make it on television, but they're all around. So we don't have that kind of famine, but we have a different kind of famine, and we have to work on that, like Joseph did work on that. Well, he made it up. He made it up higher. He went from the pit to the prison, now to the palace. But there were times when he was at a stop. And sometimes we're at a stop. But God can use the stops to make us stronger in our character. And God can use the stops to make us ready to do something. And God had a plan for Joseph, and God has plans for us. Will you come, please?